some of you who are on the line have been to our face-to-face breakfast clubs that we've been running for just over a year. And they've become very popular, but people kept asking us how could they join virtually. So we teamed up with Liz to start this breakfast club, and we're kicking off with this topic on neuroscience and performance management because it seems to be one that lots of people are talking to us about. It's an area where we've done some work, so we can actually talk about some practical examples. And looking at the number of people on this webinar, it looks like it's an area you guys are interested in as well. So shall we get going?
Mm-hmm.
By all means, ask me questions in the chat box, and Lindsay and Liz are going to help me make sure I notice them and answer them, because we don't want this to be just a one-way dialogue. Liz, I forgot.
Do you want me to do the slides?
No, I've done it. Don't worry, I've done it. Okay, so for those of you who don't know Head, Heart and Brain, we work in leadership development using science, mainly neuroscience, to back up what we do, to find an evidence base, if you like. We also do a lot of work with HR teams, both in capability and in helping them look at what science is saying about HR policy and practice and how we can organize ourselves and write our policies and carry out our practice based on scientific evidence of how people behave, are motivated, and how organizations work most effectively. That's what we're going to cover today. So we're going to have a look at how happy are people with performance management. I've picked 4 areas about what the science is saying, and then a bit of what that means in practice. And of course, we want your thoughts and views. The thing that makes these breakfast clubs really work is having that debate about what this really means in your companies and how you might introduce some of these ideas, or indeed, if you think they're rubbish, why you think they are. So we wanted to start off with a quick poll here. Liz, do you know how you're going to do this bit?
Yeah.
So we wanted to really understand how many of you have changed your performance management process in the last year, or how many of you are in the process of or planning to change it in the year ahead. So if you can just pop your answer into this poll, that will give us a good sense of where people are at.
Can you see those results coming through, Jan?
Yep, so at the moment, 72% of people, nearly 73% of people saying they're planning to change in the year ahead, and other people have already made those changes. So a good third of people already made those changes. So we really...
What if the answer's both?
So the answer's everyone's doing something by the looks of it. I'll just give that another minute or so to let people finish
yes, it's great
giving us their information. And one of the reasons why we were interested in that information is we're seeing a lot of activity on places like LinkedIn. There's a thread going at the moment on one of the HR groups where people are getting very passionate about whether you actually do need to change your performance management process, or it's just a case of kind of doing it better. And I think the jury's out, at least on that thread. So some of this science might point you in the direction of which ways you might change your performance management to make it more effective. Shall we move on from that? Looks like we've got about 78% of people who are planning to change and 33% who already have.
Brilliant.
Can I get rid of this, Liz? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So looking at what we're trying to do with performance management, I mean, basically what we're trying to do here is to say we've got the same workforce, but we want to get better performance out of them, so to move that curve along. And some research by the Corporate Leadership Council has shown that tweaking performance management gives you something like a 3 to 5% increase in performance. So that's making small changes about maybe the way you write goals, the way you give feedback, that type of thing. But organizations believe that they need to make something like a 20% change in productivity and performance in order to meet economic and competitive challenges. So if people want to kind of think about that in the chat box, is that true of your organization? Does that something like a 20% increase in your performance? Are those the sorts of numbers you're being challenged to make? And their premise is, and I think most of us would agree with this, is that we're not going to get those changes by just continuing with the same types of performance processes. So they also looked at what sorts of things people are changing. And again, we've got a little poll going here. Liz, if you can put that up. Just asking what sorts of changes you have made, or you might, and there's quite a few here, so if you want to tell us what, and tick as many as are relevant. So you're removing ratings, that's one that seems popular at the moment. Added more formal reviews, reduced the number of formal reviews. People seem to be going both ways on that. Given more power to the employee, make goal setting and drafting goals the employee's responsibility. Used an understanding of neuroscience. We'd be very interested to hear who's already doing that. And maybe some of you have stopped having a performance management process as we know it altogether.
Everybody, yeah.
So I'm seeing people here saying that, yes, they are looking for quite significant increases in performance. We've got Colin saying 10 to 20%. We've got Julia saying 20% improvement in that region anyway. We've got people saying, Helen here saying, we're trying to create a high performance culture. Okay, and we're seeing a number of people, interesting, more power to the employee is the highest change that people are making here on the poll, followed closely by putting responsibility for goals with employees. No one yet has stopped performance management completely. Interesting. Although Justin's saying that they're making it much more fluid in their organisation. Yeah. Justin, can you type in there what you mean by more fluid? We'd be very interested to see that. David's saying using more self-assessment, which I guess is linked to the more power for employees. And we've got people doing additional performance reviews. Liz, can we move this on?
That poll.
So then we can have a look at what Corporate Leadership Council found. So they found these common tweaks make no difference. So apologies for anyone who's just told us they've done this. So rank order ratings, we're going to talk a bit more about ratings and ranking people towards the end of this, but that made no difference to increases in performance, nor did increasing the number of formal reviews. An emphasis on weakness also didn't make a difference, whether that was formal or informal. And again, we look at from a brain point of view why that's probably the case. And a surprising one here that I'm sure a lot of people will be surprised to see, that personal development plans made no difference. And that's possibly because they were so loosely or they were potentially loosely connected to the day-to-day job. I think a lot of development plans we see have your development on kind of your plan and your day-to-day job, and there's not much linkage between them. And then the manager making changes to the employee's goals as opposed to the employee recognizing where their goals need to be updated and changed during the year also make no difference, and indeed may even have a detrimental effect. So looking at your chat here, so Justine, thank you. You're saying that the more fluid approach you've put in is to have more regular conversations, not all focused on the end of the year, rather than sort of one big feedback event. And that's really interesting. I think that's quite a brain-savvy approach to be doing there. And then we've got someone else here saying creating more of a feedback culture that's important to build strong performance. And Julia saying she would like if they could stop it completely. We should have asked that question. So what's the science telling us then? So I've looked at 4 things. There are lots of other things we could have looked at, but I think these are the 4 most important things. And 2 of them are kind of meta things that really are about the foundation or the principles on which you run your performance management, and the other 2 are about specific areas of performance management. Excuse me. So the first one is, what's the mindset that you bring to performance in your organization? And this is really the work of a lady called Carol Dweck, that's D-W-E-C-K, who's been looking at success she's been doing this work for over 20 years. And she has found that there are 2 different mindsets that people bring to their work and indeed their life. One she calls a fixed mindset, and people with a fixed mindset really believe that they were born with their attributes. So they were born bright, or they were born talented, or they were born smart. And their role in life is to find situations where they can demonstrate that talent or that skill. The other mindset, and I'm not defending her title, some of them are a bit kind of not great, but the other mindset she says she found, is what she calls a growth mindset. And someone with a growth mindset, their belief is that no matter how smart or clever they are, they're constantly trying to improve their performance. And they're constantly looking at how they can learn, who they can learn from, and how they can gain new experiences that improve their performance. And Carol Dweck's view is that in a modern organization, unless we have a growth mindset, unless both individuals and the way we run our talent processes are based on a growth mindset, we will not be able to deal with the amount of change that's going on. And she's just begun some work looking at the link between organizations that have a growth mindset. So they believe that their role is to develop people's core capabilities, so develop whatever they start with in the organization to help them become better. And that unless organizations have that mindset about performance management and about talent management, then in the long term they won't be successful. And I can see on the chat line we've got some people here saying they agree that a strengths-based discussion and a focus on what people are good at are important. But I think there's a subtlety here. It's not just what they're good at. It's how they can get even better at it, is the nature of the conversations that you're expecting people to have around a growth mindset. And the implications for this are, unless you have this mindset, then managers don't really see the point of performance conversations. Because if you hold a belief that someone is clever, is bright, is smart, and that they can't get, they're born like that, they can't get any better, then they're not going to put the effort into things like giving feedback, things like giving performance information. So I don't know how that fits with your organizations. The vast majority of organizations we work with have a fixed mindset. So they believe that people come in able to do something, able to be successful in their organization, and the role of their talent processes is to keep those people in place and avoid them leaving the organization. So we've got Julia here saying, agree that they have a fixed mindset, very much so. So we've got Andy here saying, we've started to measure capability growth as part of the performance management process, but leaders find it difficult. That's really interesting, Andy. So we've done some work with one of our clients where we've helped them look at goal setting in terms of people writing their goals in a way that's about how they can get better at something rather than what they can just achieve with the goal, and also measuring their performance based on the effort that they've made to get better rather than just the outcome they get. We've got Julia saying here, so we've got Anne-Marie saying here that they're kind of stuck with the acronym of being an A. More about that in a minute, but that's definitely fixed mindset, you're right. And then the second overall thing that we've looked at and that the science is telling us is that most performance management processes set up a threat response for the employee. So we use this model that looks at the way the brain responds to threat and reward. And just for those of you who may not be familiar with this, our brain scans for threat, and from an evolutionary point of view, that kept us safe. So if we noticed, you know, the snake in the grass or the tiger about to stalk us in the jungle, we were able to take action and get away quickly. In a modern business, that threat is often a social threat. So it's a threat to the way our boss or the organization deals with us that makes us feel a sense of threat. And performance management probably does that in a number of ways. And this model is a shorthand way of remembering the areas that our brain responds to threat and reward. But from a threat point of view, performance management often gives us a sense of uncertainty. So when someone says to us, oh, we've appointed a new manager and he has ideas about how the department runs, the immediate reaction is, oh my God, what does that mean for my job? How are they going to make me do my job differently? Am I going to kind of fit with their ideas? Those sorts of things. In the brain is a sense of threat, a sense of concern, and something we want to move away from. People like to have options. The brain science has shown that even if the options are poor options, i.e. neither of them is a very good idea, we much prefer to have that sense of control of being able to choose what we do. And particularly feedback from managers can kind of imply to employees that they have to do the job in the way the manager wants them to do it rather in the way they've created. People's sense of reputation is immediately put into threat mode when you say the words, I want to give you some feedback. And if you put yourself back in a situation where someone said it to you, I'd suggest that 90% of us assume that that feedback is not positive, but that's negative feedback that someone's trying to give us. And then finally, we all get a sense of reward when things are equitable and fair. So if in performance management, for example, our budget gets cut and that means we don't have the resources to meet our goals, then there's a sense of unfairness or lack of equity. And one of the interesting things I think about threat and reward is that in performance management, often the threat is with the employee, because most performance management processes are set up in a way that suggests that the power is with the manager. So the manager tends to have the sense of certainty around when they're going to have the performance conversation and how they have options around what they do, when they do it, and the way the work gets carried out. Their sense of reputation is enhanced in that that process because they have the power, and then most people would probably say they feel that it's fair for the managers. So the organizations that we've been working with have been putting in tweaks really to their processes or changes to their processes that put more power with the employee and balance out this sense of threat and reward. So you can see here on the chat line, we're still chatting away about fixed and growth mindset, with people saying there's a lot of fixed mindset and a few people taking actions to try and shift that balance into more of a growth mindset, or capability growth, as one organization is calling it. How are you guys doing on your sense of threat and reward? I think we've got a poll here. So how would you say your performance management processes balance that sense of threat and power to managers? So if people can give us some feedback here on our poll. So is the sense of threat high, with all the power is with the manager? Medium, you've managed to take action to balance it? Or it's low, that in this area you've taken some action and worked on it? Or just that your culture is much more balanced in that way? We've got Fiona here talking also about ratings and 9-box grid, which of course is very much a fixed mindset mentality. And part of the issue is, and we'll look at this when we talk about ratings, is once people get into one of those boxes, it's extremely hard, particularly if it's one of the top right-hand boxes, to move them. And that's because their sense of reputation is threatened if they're moved from a high-ranking box to a lower one. We've got Helen saying they're slowly changing the performance culture, and it's about taking control of people's own performance. That's very much the route we've gone with some of our clients that we've been working with. How do we actually train and give people more responsibility for their own performance? So looking at the poll, 52% of people think that they've got a high sense of threat in their organizations, and 42% medium, only 5% low. It's really interesting. I think if you did nothing else to improve your performance management processes, balancing out that sense of threat, mitigating it a bit would be a great step in the right direction. So we've got Anne-Marie saying theirs is a mix. We have equity in the meeting, but because we have guided distribution of ratings, control is taken away from the employee. Yeah, very interesting comment. Julia saying they've got something very similar there.
Would you win that poll, Jan?
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Okay. The next thing I wanted to talk about is feedback, and this can be somewhat controversial. And if you look at my first line, it's that there's very little evidence that feedback improves performance. Now, usually when I say that, I get people getting really quite cross with me. So let me tell you what some of that evidence is. This stems out of us really looking less at the neuroscience and going back and looking at the history of feedback. And there's some interesting meta-research that was done back in the 1990s and early 2000s that looked at studies of research and found that at best research, 30% of research helped, 30% of feedback helped to improve performance. 30% did nothing, and 40% actually reduced performance. And the research looked at all the kinds of performance studies that had been done over a large number of different, through different organizations and different scientists. So this is social research, social psychology research. It's not neuroscience. And it also says that even of the third that helped performance, it only helped if it was related to a very specific task. So feedback about your style, feedback about the way you go about doing your work, none of that helped performance at all. And if you look at the neuroscience, there's probably some good reasons for that. One is that we all have mental models that we work to. So ways in which we interpret and look at the world, if you like, and it's highly unlikely that your mental model and my mental model are the same. And because of that, when we give people feedback, we're in effect talking about slightly different things. And in doing that, it's hard for people to interpret that feedback in a way where the feedback fits their mental model of how they're meant to be doing their work. The second thing, and probably the most important thing, is feedback is probably a threat, or at least negative feedback, so developmental feedback, as we euphemistically call it, is a threat to most of the core domains. So it's a threat to certainty, because people think they know how they're meant to be doing their job, and then they're told they're doing it, incorrectly or not quite in the right way. It's a threat to their options, because they're unable to make choices about the way they go about their role. And it's also a big threat to people's sense of reputation. Telling somebody that they're not carrying out their work properly makes or in a way they thought they should be, makes them feel a strong sense of threat to kind of their sense of who they are and their standing in the group. I think the thing about this, though, is you can work around this sense of threat with feedback by getting employees to be much more responsible for understanding their own work standards and for going and seeking the feedback that they need in order to work effectively and to improve their own performance. So making that shift from feedback comes from the manager to feedback is solicited by the employee mitigates that sense of threat. If we've decided we want that information ourselves, we don't get a sense of threat, and we may even create a sense of reward in our brain by confirming our own, how we can take control of our own performance. So I see we've got quite a lot of talk about this in the chat box. Let's just pick up. So we've got Sarah saying the skill is in giving feedback. Shouldn't be underestimated. It's a difficult thing for people to do. I agree with that. And one of the things we've found is if you put the responsibility in the employee's hand, managers are also happy about that, because they get put in the role of asking the questions about how can the employee improve, those growth mindset questions, if you like, rather than the fixed mindset, and you get a double win on that. We've got Fiona saying she can see this. They've recently run a number of employee feedback workshops. The thing everyone hated, without exception, was the manager giving feedback part of the process, and we've removed this from any appraisal documentation and have been working instead for managers to give better quality feedback during the year. Absolutely, that's the way to do it. And if you can get people to adopt a growth mindset, they're much more likely also to be using those coaching skills you're teaching them.
Yeah,
David's saying, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was going to say there are also some questions about does positive feedback work?
So positive feedback does work and can even be a sense of reward in the brain. So praise, for example, gives us a sense of reward in the brain, makes us feel good. And praise is often given a bad name in organizations, but it's a process that we really, from a brain savvy point of view, could be using more. So we're not saying positive feedback doesn't work. Positive feedback to ourselves, recognizing when we've done well works. Asking for feedback from other people works, and giving positive feedback works. So those are the kind of 3 golden rules, if you like. I think I need to move on here from a time point of view. So the final thing here that we looked at is rankings and ratings, and anyone who's even had a passing look at the HR press has known that this is creating quite a lot of feedback in itself. So from a brain point of view, labeling generates that sense of threat in the brain, that flight or fight response in the brain, because it puts us into a sense of stress, if you like. And a study of 2,000 reviews found that even when people were given the top rating, so that the A or the 1 or whatever way round it is in your organization, that still felt negative to them. They still felt anxiety and threat, just even sort of waiting to hear what that rating was. And once they got the rating, they then felt anxiety and threat about whether they could keep it. The other thing rankings and ratings do is set up what's called in-group and out-group. Now, that may not be all bad, but what you're doing is basically setting up divisions within your organization. So you've got people who are, the high performers, who you think are kind of special. In effect, that's what you're saying. That's the in-group of high-performing people. And then you've got the out-group of less high-performing people. Now, you may want some of that, but the issue is when those 2 groups start to kind of vilify each other. And the neuroscience evidence really says that people who are in somebody's out-group, we're much less able to empathize with them and take a lot less time in understanding their point of view. So you just deepen those divisions. So I don't know what people. So we've got Richard here saying, so the difference between asking is give me some feedback and asking give me some feedback is how I handle it. Yeah, exactly. So asking for feedback probably doesn't give you a sense of threat in the brain because you're in control of that decision. So we've got Robert asking, are there not bigger problems in rating people than refusing to share them? Sorry, Robert, I'm not really quite sure about
Meaning the ratings, I guess.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there are. So even just rating people. sets up that sense of threat, but also sets up that sense of in-group and out-group, which you may have problems controlling, and you may be setting up in divides within your organization that you don't want. So I notice we've only got 4 or 5 minutes left. So here's some practical steps that you could do that doesn't involve kind of throwing everything out you've got at the moment and starting again, but that could really help you make some significant differences. So check the mindset of your managers and train people for a growth mindset. Carol Dweck's work shows that even a 2-hour workshop can help people to shift from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset. And once they do, they start they start to give more performance. They notice more performance information, and they coach a lot more. Reduce the sense of threat and look at those core elements and put more balance of power across managers and employees. And it looks like from this poll that would be a good step for lots of people. There's more about core on our website, including a short video that you can use. If you want to, you can download and use. Reduce threat in feedback and shift much more to people being responsible for collecting their own feedback and for using positive feedback much more. People get out of the habit of giving positive feedback. We haven't really talked about goals, but structure goals so they create new habits and help people to, again, have control over their own goals. And then consider what ratings are actually achieving for you. I know a lot of organizations are beginning to take ratings out altogether. Our point of view on that is that you need to help people deal with the uncertainty that gives your managers around then how they sort of communicate performance and particularly deal with other types of talent processes and particularly reward. So many of the organizations we're working with, we're helping them to kind of wean themselves off of ratings rather than take them away completely immediately. So helping people to find alternatives before they completely kind of take ratings away, and instead of using ratings which are about just the outcome, using ratings which are about achieving a growth mindset about how they go about working and performing. So let's look at some of your comments here. So we've got Sarah saying, I agree that sometimes it's small steps and a phased approach for managing change. Yep, Sarah, you're absolutely on the same wavelength as us. You need to pace people's ability to make these changes. And then Fiona's saying, we encourage, sorry, I've lost my screen, that the kind of conversation is ongoing and not a big download at the end of the year, which is absolutely brain savvy. So the more you can get people to be having an ongoing dialogue, both employees and their managers, the more brain savvy you'll be. The other thing about that is I think you nip issues in the bud before they become big problems and potentially lead to much worse performance issues. And also you can catch people doing the right things, so you can catch them doing what is working rather than kind of what isn't. I can see Liz has put a poll up here asking you to give us some feedback, which in the spirit of what we're talking about here, we'd like to ask you about how useful you think the Breakfast Club has been. So would really be interested in seeing your feedback there. And I have no sense of threat, I hope, because I've asked for it. Okay, so it looks like we're getting very, which is really good. What you can see at the top of the screen here is some references to some articles that we've put up on our website, which is www.headheartbrain, which one looking at performance management overall, the other looking at feedback, and the third looking at Carol Dweck's growth mindset as it applies to organisational performance. So please feel free to go and have a look at those. We're also going to be putting the recording of this webinar up on our website, and Liz, I think you will be also on yours, won't you? So if any of your colleagues want to listen, they can, or if indeed you want to go over some of the points again, you can. And these are our contact details if you would like to ask us any questions or you have any further comments. We've got a comment here from Emily in Australia that says, one of the suggestions as part of our 360 process we have was that it was important for the manager to be able to suggest other people they would like to hear 360 feedback from. Absolutely. Taking a brain savvy approach there. So no, I don't think that would create a threat response, or it would reduce the threat response, because they're in control of asking that question. So thank you, everyone. The next virtual breakfast club is looking at whether your work habits hinder your brain and the effectiveness of your own brain and hence your own performance. So I hope you'll join us for that. You can sign up on our website at that. And thank you very much for all your wonderful questions. Sorry we weren't able to answer more of them.
There were so many coming through, wasn't there, John?
Yeah, massive. Thank you for your involvement.
Thank you, everybody. It's been absolutely a real success, I think. I look forward to doing speaking at the next one on the 3rd of February. Thank you. Everyone's sort of leaving us now, so we'll
Have
just
a great
leave the
day,
chat.
everyone.
Absolutely. We'll
Sorry,
just leave
Liz.
the chat going for a couple more minutes until people finish, and then we will end the webinar. So thank you. Have a good day. Okay, I think that's it. We'll end the webinar now. Are you free for a quick telephone conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall we stay on this line, or are you going to ring back in?
I'll ring you on your mobile, Jan.
Okay.
A couple of minutes.